Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tuller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on May 9th with Catherine Grant, and she will be giving a presentation on all about family groups on FamilySearch.org. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner on integrating DNA results into your own family tree. Before we begin, here's a little bit about James. James Tanner has worked for 17 years as a family history volunteer and is presently serving at the BYU Library Family History Center. He's on the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and has 7 children and 34 grandchildren. And we'll now turn the time over to James if he's ready.
Okay, well, we're glad to be here for another webinar from the BYU Library Family History Center. Today, we're going to talk about integrating your DNA results into your own family tree. Taking it a little bit further than you need to, than you would have just looking at it and say, oh, that's interesting. But it can be interesting, but it's a lot better when it's integrated and you understand what kinds of things you can learn from your DNA test. There are essentially 2 major companies that do DNA testing and have the user base and the supporting historical records that make a significant number of matches possible. And those are MyHeritage, who is primarily in Europe, and it has its big base of users in Europe, and Ancestry, which is primarily here in the United States and in Great Britain and a number of other countries. So they're both good choices. And by the way, I would suggest that you may want to take DNA tests from both. They have different sets of users and they have different sets of records. And so there's some advantage in doing both. When you first take a DNA test, if you don't have a family tree, in other words, if you just take the test to see what's going to happen in your DNA test, you'll find that it's nothing more than a kind of an interesting ethnicity information. You'll find out some places out there calculated where you might be from, where your ancestors probably lived. And but in order for you to have some any kind of real information from that, it would give you and help you find individual people or any individual relatives or ancestors, you really do have to have a family tree that goes along with the DNA test. And I'll kind of talk about that in a little more detail as we go along. And I guess the first question would be, do you have any questions that can be solved using DNA test results? This is a kind of a difficult question to do in the abstract, because generally these questions come about as you're doing research and things either don't add up, or you have someone that either magically appears and or magically disappears, and you'd never be able to quite understand how that particular person fits into your family tree. You might also be faced with family traditions that that your family was descended from, say, Native Americans or from some other group around the world. And all of those kinds of questions that deal with the origin or the importance of and the identity of a person can be helped by taking a DNA test. There's no magic here. It's basically another genealogical research tool. it helps to give a lot of information about a lot of different people when it may or may not, but it may or may not answer anything that you immediately have. Now, if it's something that you're trying to find a close relative, for instance, you either know or suspect that you were adopted, or that your parents weren't, you never did know who your father or mother was, or whatever. If you have those kinds of unknown questions, or your family's been split up all your life and you didn't know where anyone is in your family, and you don't know if they're still alive or what, all of those kinds of issues are directly addressed by DNA tests. And that's the reason why I start out by saying that it's important to have a DNA test with a company that has a user database that's in the millions and millions of people. There's a higher chance that you'll be able to identify anyone related if a lot of people have taken that particular DNA test. And both Ancestry and MyHeritage have tremendously large user bases out there. And so they're good candidates for having DNA tests. Now, it seems some of these things seem, I hope they seem very, very obvious, but one of the things that you have to understand is your DNA matches only happen when people use the same company and have family trees that include the possible relationship. So it's very possible that you could take a DNA test and your relative could take another DNA test, and you would never know because those were two different companies. And that's why another reason why I would encourage people to take more than one DNA test. At least they're covering the whole ground as much as possible, and getting the possibility that some other relative took that test. Now, another thing that's important is the family tree, and I'm going to repeat this probably 2 or 3 times, so you just take a deep breath and listen, because without a family tree, you really have nothing. You have some numbers, and you have some places your family may have come from. But once you put that together with information that you can find in a family tree, then you begin to see real people. And the cause and action DNA is not necessarily going to do your genealogical work for you. It's not going to say, you may see a lot of people who are your near relatives, or a lot of people who are distant relatives, but absent doing the what I would call the normal work of a genealogist, in looking at records and determining, getting a pedigree going and getting your family tree going, is when you'll start to see some real use and real results from having a DNA test. So that's kind of the situation. Now, what you can do, let's say you just say, I'm just going to do a DNA test. It would, and I'm not interested enough to put up a family tree. Well, yes, you might be able to find missing parents, siblings, or sometimes grandparents without having a big family tree. But this would be the exceptions, because your relatives would have to have taken the same company's test to have any matches at all. And so your chances overall would be not overly great that you would find a near relative immediately, unless that person took a DNA test and with the same company. So this is kind of where it goes. And so when you're starting out with a DNA test, you're starting out like this little sprout here. You're starting to get a little bit of information, but it hasn't matured into a real pedigree with enough information to just determine unknown relatives or things like that all of the things that you can attempt to do with the DNA testing. So even if you get a DNA test, the number of matches that you get could be zero, or they could be more than you can imagine. You see here with two matches matched up to parent one and parent two for me and my DNA test. And of course, don't have a lot of access to anybody else's tests, so I have to use my own for examples. And I have a little over 17,000 matches with parent one and 21,000 matches with parent two. I can tell immediately by the surnames that parent one is my mother and parent two is my father. And they've also, this is an ancestry test, and they've told me that the Christensen line at least came from Sweden, which it actually came from Denmark, but Sweden and Denmark at a lot of times were the same country. And that's parent one's inheritance. And then I got a parent two inheritance. You'll see that both your parents are going to be considerably different, and that you get your 50% from your father and 50% from your mother. And yes, the Tanners are Southern Utah and Arizona settlers, and that's pretty it's very obvious with all of those names listed on the initial view here from Ancestry. So here are some of the situations that can be addressed with DNA testing. So this just getting an idea from practical reality. Now if you're waiting for me to start talking a bunch of jargon about DNA and then centimorgans and all that kind of stuff, I think you need to understand how the test works with your genealogy. And if you want to pursue the more difficult or the more extended types of inquiries that you can do with DNA testing, then you probably will have to learn a lot of the technology and all of the wording, the jargon that goes along with it. But here's the kind of things that you might want to know. The first is in covering biological relationships. So these can the DNA test reveals relationships that have been forgotten or were intentionally concealed. There are stories, just continual stories that stream through the genealogical community of parents that are reunited with lost children, children who are finding out who their real parents are, people who find members of their family, their brother or sister relationship that they lost years and years ago, and all the people who are adopted and are looking for their biological parents. All these things are a byproduct of DNA testing, and the test can give you very valuable insights into that. And the second part of it is solving family mysteries. So my situation, for example, I had a great-grandfather who was born in Denmark, and the rumor or story from the family was that he was adopted, and it appeared from the parents and the two much older daughters in the family that could be very likely. But there was no real way to know. And after finding a church record that confirmed the fact that he was adopted, it was even more of a mystery. Well, this is where having a robust, well-researched family tree came into play, because one of my daughters began the process of looking in the town where he was living, where he supposedly was born, to see if there was someone else with in a different family, in a different situation, that was adopted. And it turned out that she found a very likely person. We found a baby that was born with the same first name, and then went basically was disappeared, and was the son of a mother who was not related to, not married to her, to the father of the child. So that was a pretty good indication. But what happened next was more important, and that was that as we took our DNA tests to MyHeritage, they found that that we began to see people in matches on that side of the family. There were two things that happened. It was that the people who were descendants from that great grandfather and the ones who were descendants from his sisters were never related. There was never a crossover between the two. So it was pretty obvious that he was not related to his sisters in that family or his adopted parents. But in addition to that, it turned out that we had DNA matches from people who were living in that community, and by the way, who were still living in Denmark, and were showing to be cousins, but there was no other way that they could have been related except through this person, and assuming that the person was correctly identified. So he was identified, and because of the customs and laws in Denmark, we knew who the father was and the mother, and that gave us an entirely new line of a biological line to pursue, and also opened up a whole bunch of cousins who lived in Denmark and other places around the world. So this is the kind of thing that happens regularly with DNA testing, is that people begin to find breakthroughs in family situations that they never would have had before. So in the other way, another advantage is surname research, and there's Y-DNA on the chromosome to pass from father to son, along with the surname, and that can help learn biological surname in case of adoption or name changes. So there are ways to take certain specialized tests, and you may have to go outside of the two major testing companies, and Ancestry and MyHeritage, to get this type of test. And it may be not as many people to try to find, but it's over time they will probably begin adding more and more testing to the DNA testing, and may very well be possible that the big companies will start to offer this kind of service. In the part of MyHeritage that's actually happened quite recently, and so there are ways to get that information. So it's a way to break through the biological barrier in adoption, or even on name changes, and when people have disappeared. And now it's becoming known that DNA testing and using these large databases online are extremely good in revolutionizing the way that cold cases are being solved. So it's pretty regular that you'll see a news article that some evidence was found of solving a criminal act or a murder or whatever in the past that had been unsolved for 20, 30 years. And now by going back through with the DNA evidence and the family trees, they've been able to unravel those mysteries that have been unsolved. And then another thing that it does is to identify unidentified individuals. I mean, this is something that happened. It's just if you want to look at it, my great grandfather was an unidentified individual, but in a lot of cases, what we're talking about are parents who a father who disappeared after the first baby was born, or any other kind of a family situation like that, where people were never completely lost contact with some of their relatives. And it's just amazing how many relatives that, or how many people you actually can get, can become related to as you go through this process. So there is a direct relationship between the amount of research you do about your family, the actual genealogical research of which we've talk about constantly with our webinars and our classes from the BYU library. And the important thing is to put that into your family tree, an online family tree. The more information you have on your family tree and the more individuals, that's more likely you are to have DNA matches. So when you may be disappointed at first that there's only very few matches, but if you examine those and incorporate all the information that you learn through the DNA process into a family tree, then you'll be able to have the information you need to continue to do searching back in time and find more information. Some of the things you may find, by the way, are extremely interesting. I have great grandparents, a great grandmother who it was lived in England, and one of the things that we found in the records about this particular family, this in England, was that they were travelers, and the travelers is a shorthand way in England sometimes for people who were the kinds of people that traveled between villages and towns making sales, but on most occasions this was a reference to someone who was a Romi, which is the real name of saying of being a gypsy. And we kind of, just from the way the way the family had, his records were kept and the way the family was, we suspected that may be possible. But then just recently we got a DNA test from I got a DNA test result from Ancestry that said that they'd done some more ethnic searches and found that I had a connection to the Romis, to the Roma. And so that gave us a little bit of a confirmation on the fact that this family may actually have been gypsies as we suspected. So when you're talking, and once again, when you do multiple tests with different websites, they can add matches. Now, are they going to all agree? Now, the answer is no. And when you say they're estimates and they're based on percentages, and so the way that the tests go, there are going to be some differences, and that sometimes it makes people a little frustrated because they don't know which of the tests is more valid. But the answer here is that you're working on percentages and you're working on indications and conclusions that can be drawn because of certain levels and certain benchmarks that can create presumptions of relationships. And if you work with that enough, and if you get familiar with the way that the DNA works, then you begin to be comfortable to know that even if it's only a difference of a few percentage points, it could make a tremendous difference in the conclusions you can come to. So one thing that I think is just absolutely the most helpful thing at all, and just from the standpoint of this is from the standpoint of a person who's been doing genealogy for the greater part of my life, and that is that it validates your genealogy, your paper genealogy. As I go back with my great grandparents and my great grandparents and so forth, and I look at my DNA matches that are coming from that, and this is a listing of the DNA matches from that match and substantiate all of these people. Basically, every person on here is well known to me. These are the people that I've researched over my life, and it's comforting to have taken a DNA test that shows to me that I actually am related to all these people. And that means on a scientific DNA testing level, every one of these people is confirmed by the DNA matches that came first. This one came from Ancestry, that's there. And so this is it's a comforting thing, but it's also a reinforcement that says that we can use this information to go back further, and we are, as long as we keep following good genealogical research practices, we probably can extend lines and find a lot more relatives. If you don't take DNA match or tests and get DNA matches, then basically your family tree is only as valid as your own personal research. In other words, if you have been a little bit remiss in adding sources or working on from original documents and things like that, then the things may not be as clear, and rather than being a validation of your research, it may turn out to be a suggestion that your research could have been a little bit better if you start showing up people who you had no idea you were related to and didn't know anything about. So here's another kind of benefit from these big companies, and this is from, once again, Ancestry. It's called Through Lines, and it shows possible ancestral connections. What that means is that it will connect through people who share DNA at various levels with me, and show that back to the person that was the common ancestor. And so we can go back directly in time and find out who the person was who was back many generations in the past. This only works back about a maximum of 6 generations. That means including you're starting with 1 for yourself, that you 2 for your parents, 3 for your grandparents, etc. That's about the far as any of this can go, because the amount of DNA that you get from each of the biological grandparents is half from each. And so as you go down, that half of a half of a half eventually gets to the point where excuse me, where your connection with that person, your relationship, or what you would call your bloodline, is so attenuated, or such a small percentage, that it's difficult to make any conclusions. Now, DNA matches are living with living people. So when you get these matches, they're all people who are alive. They may have died since they took the test, but that's it's kind of unusual. So when you're getting all those people, they're actually people you can talk to. Now, they may not want to talk. They may not. I would just suggest that once you get involved in genealogy and particularly start taking a DNA test, that you're going to have to little more, let's call it, not quite up so tight about connecting with people and talking and developing that, because this whole purpose of this is to identify people that you are related to. And using this kind of DNA matching, you can, in some cases, have a way to connect directly with these people if they wish to be contacted. And if for people, by the way, who start out and know little or nothing about their ancestors, they didn't grow up in a family like I did, where it was just a solid mass of relatives everywhere, that that can be a great open up a whole vista of information that you and belonging when you realize how many people you are related to and how much information there is out there about your family. Now, what about happens? Why is what in this would not happen? What if you're in that situation where you say, well, you're never going to get anything with my family? And the answer to that is probably not as likely as you think. You may be surprised. Now, why would you be surprised? Why wouldn't you be surprised? So, if you came from a country, if your ancestors came, say, recently in the recent past, from a country where there has not been a lot of genealogical information made available or even known, and that would include some countries around the world in Eastern Europe and other places um, that have very little uh, genealogical information available online or searchable. And so, in a lot of cases, there you've got to rely on just the people who have managed to take DNA tests. And once again, that may be difficult from the standpoint of the politics or whatever of the country. And so, you may not have that many connections, but that helps to know that also. And that is something else that you need to know about, because then your research may be more productively aimed at traditional research methodology of finding records and doing research in archives and repositories. So when you don't have a tree, that's not helpful. That doesn't get you much anywhere without a family tree. If you go on to and get a bunch of matches, like the thousands of matches that I have on on both Ancestry and MyHeritage, then you'll see so many people without anybody in their family tree. If you look at this closely, where it's got a list of the people, the first one up there has like 2,700 people in there and a common ancestor. The next one down only has 8 people in their tree, and 35 and 17 and so forth and 9. And that is severely limiting them from having connections. Now, the fact that I have a biological DNA testing link with these people then makes it possible for the program to go say, well, here's the only person out there, the only grandparent that could be the common ancestor here. So it's a combination of the records and the information. Today, with artificial intelligence, a lot of the connections between individuals are being sort of calculated. In other words, there's enough information in the public that's available publicly through the large websites and around the world that that's able to, the companies are able to predict the identity of a common ancestor. So the larger your tree, the more names you have available. Of course, you've got to be, these names have to be valid, and they have to be supported by sources, historical sources, records and documents that will show that these people were actually related. Or what you're going to end up with is a lot of matches, but no substance there, no way to move backward in time. So it's sort of cause and effect. If you take a DNA test without a tree, you have very limited possibilities. If you have your family tree and it's quite large and well developed, and a lot of people in the family tree, but you don't take a DNA test, you're simply missing the present day connections that you might have. So here's an idea of what it looks like. And this is a report about how I am related to one person who has uh, is on a family tree. And you can see that there's a green line there that shows how I'm related to that person. And it also has a list of surnames down at the bottom that give me an indication that of who that is and how I'm related to these people. And so it's there's an accumulation of information that can reinforce or may do the opposite. It may, when you've decided and found a likely subject to extend your line to another grandparent, you may find that DNA doesn't support that at all, and that it's supporting other names. And so that can also help you to do the corrections as you go through the work. Now, one thing that's happening here, this is a copy of a screenshot of a part of a family tree on Ancestry. And you can see up there, there's a green suggestion that says it's a potential. Oh, this is someone that goes beyond my current research. In other words, I ended my research with Jacob DeVries, and I now have a succeeding possible father for him. Now that's a suggestion from Ancestry. It may be accurate, but without looking at all the documents, and if there are no documents, if see what the kind of information there is that would let me incorporate that person into my family tree. So here's what they have on it, and it's possible because these are Netherlands, and but the problem I see here is that the birthplace and the death place of this person doesn't necessarily match up with any of the names of the places for these other relatives. So this may turn out to be just a suggestion simply based on some superficial possibilities. And if it does, it would be going back on this line. And you can see that it's possible that that it's consistent and that these are the places that they lived. And if it isn't, then perhaps the connection was broken back here with Abraham Benedictus de Vries in 1640. So Jacob Abraham de Vries is born about 1665. And you can see here that in this case, Abraham Benedictus de Vries, there could be quite a bit of information that would help to know whether this next step back is an actual person. And that's all happening through AI. And to some extent, it's relying upon not just the records and the names and the people, but it's also looking at the descendants of these people and their DNA and how the possibility. But this is going back quite a ways, and then it may not be as accurate as it could be. So the question is do I have any DNA support for this family line? And going back into that time frame. And the answer to that question is that my heritage shows that I have some possible connections over into the Netherlands and Belgium, but not very likely. So the question is, maybe this is maybe the records are showing and the records are valid and I have a valid line going back. But right now, and looking at the DNA estimates, there's nothing that shows me that I could be related to these people. But what about if we add in ancestry? Is that going to make a big difference? And you can see here that MyHeritage has connection from the same places as Ancestry does, except adds in Italy and Turkey. If Turkey and out there in the yellow, that's the people who I would be related to are the Romi or the Roma gypsies, and the people in Italy. Well, you have to remember that Italy occupied Romans occupied uh, Great Britain for a good few hundred years, and so it would not be unusual to have some of those Italian genes coming through to somebody from a family in New England. But it's very this is very focused and very informative on both counts as to those people that I'm most likely related to. Quite a confirmation of the amount of work that's been done. Now, MyHeritage has some of its own very sophisticated DNA tools for analyzing and helping to look at uh, the DNA information. These all are included in the program. Of course, both Ancestry and MyHeritage are subscription programs, and as from the standpoint of getting information, you probably would have you're going to need to have a subscription in order to get the information that you beyond just some superficial look at your DNA results. And so here I've redacted this. I hope I took out almost all the names. Normally there would be the names of the people taking that information, but I hope I got all of those out. So here's how much information I have. Now, one of the things that you'll see is a reference to CM on all of the DNA matches, and that's called centimorgans, and that's a statistical difference, meaning a percentage difference in between two different markers on your DNA. And it's the simplest way. That's not complete explanation, but it is essentially what it is. And if you look at it without getting into the biology and all the genetics, you basically, that number as it gets larger is an indication of a greater degree of relationship. So when it's in the 35 to 3600 range, you're basically looking at parent-child relationships. And so then it drops considerably when you get into first cousins, and when you get a little bit further down, then there's more. But it's the way that number works that it determines how much what you have. Now, one other thing that's important that happens with both Ancestry and MyHeritage is that they give you matches to other people's trees. So you have, not only do you have a ability to look at records and the DNA results and things, but they will say that you have this person has a tree with shares one of your ancestors. So as we look at that on MyHeritage, for example, these are called smart matches. So you can actually go to, and through the program, you can go in and contact people directly through MyHeritage, and if they respond, then you can communicate back and forth about how you're related to that. Another possibility that is this one is with MyHeritage is shared surnames, and to see if you once you have people that go back and forth on your on all the trees and family trees, is it would say that you have a shared surname with that person. And these are some other of the individual DNA tools that are available from MyHeritage. The centimeter explainer is just that. It explains what the percentage means. And the chromosome browser gives you a way to match up a number of up to 6 or more people at the same time and see how you all match. And then auto clustering is a part of what you call cluster research, and it calculates a possible common ancestor from the information that is in your tree and in your DNA. And then ethnicities is just a map showing all of the various ethnicities that are available through, there's hundreds of these available through MyHeritage. One important, particularly important tool from MyHeritage is the theory of family relativity. And basically it can calculate different ways. You see there's a path 1, path 2, path 3, and up to path 5. And it's based on 2 MyHeritage family trees with 82% confidence. And what it does is it says that this person over here that I've redacted out because I'm not relating to living people, that person is related to me through this chain of relationship. So we share this person, this Marinus Christensen, who's my great grandfather. We shows how he is related, and this through this person, and that helps, and it gives you some idea of who these other people are that show up in the program. And it's important to understand as we go along that in some cases, DNA testing can reveal some, I call it destabilizing information. I would say information that may cause a tremendous amount of upheaval and problems in a family. It's not unusual. They, of course, when the DNA companies are advertising their products, they are always talking about the positive people who are abundantly happy and thrilled to find their long lost relatives, whether it be parents or siblings or whoever. But on the other hand, there is a significant number of cases where you find out that something you really didn't want to know. Like, for example, that your lovely grandfather that you've had for your whole life and loved so much was not at all biologically related to you. And that's from one standpoint, I guess the way I look at it is that if this person was a good part of your life, then they're your true grandfather. And the fact that you have a biological grandfather that you never knew and never met is not as important as that relationship you had with someone who was actually your real grandfather, the one that you identified with. But basically, that is something that you need to be prepared for. And you need to have enough, there's enough possibilities in here that could happen. And so it's, always opening up a door that may or may not want to have been open. Now, as I mentioned, I haven't thrown in a lot of the jargon. I haven't gotten into all the details of all of matching the DNA results and the different tests and all of the things that could be learned, that you can learn about DNA. And I would suspect that if you start getting interested in DNA and start reading and learning about it, you'll find out that there's plenty of that information that you could possibly, more than you can possibly imagine. Right now, there's webinars, there's YouTube videos, there's lots and lots of information out there telling you about how DNA test results works. And if you really want to get back into going back more and more generations at time and taking the time to go to do the research that goes with that and finding back in time, then there are probably a lot of other dead ends and brick walls out there that DNA would help you to break through. So whether you do learn all of the information and learn all the jargon and terminology and everything that goes with DNA, or if you just learn enough to appreciate that there are relationships and use the tools that are available from the larger genealogical companies that let you know how you're related to these people and your possible relationships. And then that might be enough for you to advance and feel good about the research that you're doing. So we want to thank you all for watching. And doesn't look like anybody put any questions in the chat. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on May 9th with Catherine Grant. She will be giving a presentation on all about family groups on FamilySearch.org. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.